tell me about the journey getting to Abbey Road.
So it was about a year ago that we finished in Abbey Road, and it was kind of like a big process of actually getting there. The whole kind of idea sparked maybe towards the end of 2023. I think I was actually sitting around the fire with my family, and I was just thinking about, being a First Nations musician in the industry and putting a lot of work into the band, and had just made an epic visual album for Red Desert Dream, and just trying to get traction in the industry, and just feeling like a bit disenchanted with the industry at large, and kind of really having that feeling of not wanting to wait for like the divine hand of the music industry to come and deliver me to wherever I wanted to be, or that idea that, if you just play in front of the right person, X, Y, and Z is going to end up, then you're going to end up touring or having a deal or whatever. That, I was kind of like, if I want something awesome to happen as a sovereign musician, I can make that happen myself. And that was the first spark of the idea. And then I started asking myself, like, okay, what would be the ideal process for recording the next album, and what do I want to happen? I was like, well, I'd love to go overseas. I want to go overseas and do this work. And not too long before that, I'd actually, through Digi Youth Arts, gone to Germany with Uncle Richard Bell as part of Documented, to perform in the Aboriginal embassy there, in his embassy project. And he really was passionate about bringing First Nations artists to international audiences, both to expose those audiences to First Nations work, but also to expose young First Nations artists to the dialogues and the parallels happening in the larger art sphere around the world. So that had been a big inspiration. And at that time, I asked Uncle Richard if he had any advice for any young artists, and he said, find the most radical path and follow that.
Yeah, cool.
And so I was like, what's the wildest thing I can dream? And I was like, at the end of Red Desert Dream, which was about a longing of wanting to go home, like go back during COVID when I couldn't go over to Broome. And so I was like, well, I want to start the next album from Broome. So I created the project, which would be a 3-stage residency series where I went up and spent 2 weeks with my Anawan band member Reese in Broome, spending time on my Jabirr Jabirr country, hanging out with my community, going on country, getting mentorship from my elders, Uncle Wayne Barker and Auntie Pat Torres, so that I could get the spark for what the album would become and like the creative direction, because I write very like conceptually, like concept albums and that kind of thing. So the first idea was to go do 2 weeks there, and then we were 6 weeks at Midnight Special Records in France to write the album with the full band, and then finally ending with the 2 weeks at Abbey Road.
Is that with the full Selve band, or with additional musicians? And
full Selve band.
Yeah.
So all of us, and then our friend Josh, who came with us and is documenting the whole thing to turn it into a documentary. And so that was the kind of idea, and we had a connection to France because the producer of Red Desert Dream was a fellow called Simon Benesch, who's a Parisian musician. He's in a band over there called Fair and does a lot of scores and stuff. And he was like, well, I can connect you to my friends in France called Midnight Special Records. And really I did piece it together bit by bit. I was like, all right, I can go to Broome. And I wanted to go to the studios there, which are called Willy Studios, which is built by my relative Petrus, who's actually been building a studio out there in Broome with Mark Cole-Smith. They've got like a combined studio that they've made there, which is gorgeous. The original plan was to go there, but they were still renovating it by then, so I just hung out in the community centre. And then I was able to connect to Midnight Special Records in France. They were like, yep, if you can get the grant money, then you can do it. And I was still looking for somewhere in London. I knew I wanted to go somewhere there, but I wasn't sure. And I actually reached out to Abbey Road in the text box on the website.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which goes to like the graveyard of emails.
Yeah.
That goes to like, I don't know where that goes on my website, let alone on theirs.
How did you feel like taking that stab in the dark?
I think I was just like, I'd probably emailed about 50 different, studios at the time. I was like, I almost hesitated. I was like, this is a waste of time. I was like, you know what? I'll take a swing. And then they got back to me and they were kind of like, hey, yeah, let's have a meeting. And I was like, oh, whoa. I mean, I had created a pitch deck and tried to make it look, official and everything. And I basically had a meeting with one of their staff, Kayla, who was really excited about it. And she was like, yeah, look, if you can get the funding, then you can do this.
was funding like paying for studio time as well as like...
So I was very fortunate to get both Creative Australia funding and the First Nations Commissioning Fund.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of had applied for both, hoping I'd get one, and ended up getting double, which was really good. So it basically covered, all the costs of going to Broome with just myself, Reese, and Josh, documenting, cultural knowledge, money, the time spent out there, accommodation, and then to get the entire band to France.
Amazing.
For 6 weeks, and the per diems and everything. We managed to stretch it out there because we were actually, France was such a beautiful time because we actually lived there for 6 weeks. And that's kind of what I wanted.
Where in France was it?
We were in a place called Noyen-sur-Seine, which was about I'm probably pronouncing that terribly, but it was like an hour outside of Paris, in a little kind of sleepy French town. We were living in like this cottage, and the studio was across the street in this converted barn, which was really idyllic. And that's what I really wanted, was not to just, it was a responsive to place kind of project. I wanted to go to country, respond to that, and then go to different places like France. And it was interesting because the main mentor for me in Broome was my uncle Wayne Barker, who is a Jabirr Jabirr elder, but he's also like a fusion jazz guitarist who lived in France for like 10 years and toured around France and played in France. So there was this like relevance, and he was really excited we were going there. He's like, you'll love it there. I spent lots of time there. Go see this, go do that. So we, as I said, me and Reese went to Broome. We kind of wrote the first couple songs, like Forever and Mauboy, and kind of got the embers that would become the album. And I kind of left Broome like, all right, contemplating, knowing that we were going to Abbey Road and having that blend of awe, as any kid who's grown up loving rock and roll music, all the bands that have come out of Abbey Road and all that kind of thing. But also contemplating what did it mean when I discovered that we would actually be the first Aboriginal artists to do a record there.
How did you discover that?
I asked them.
Yeah, right.
I asked them an email. I was like, because I was more interested in the history. I was like, oh, can you let me know what other First Nations artists, have done this? And they were like, And I was like, oh, and not only that, like, obviously it was interesting to find out we're the first First Nations artist, but one of only under 5 Australian artists in general to make a full record at Abbey Road. There've been a lot of people who've passed through in XYZ. So I was kind of in Broome contemplating the knowledge of that. And that I was in awe, but also having some critical thinking, this comes with some responsibility, and I've got to make sure that I use this amazing platform to do something important, or to do something with integrity, or do something that I can come back and show Auntie Pat and Uncle Wayne and have them be like, yeah, this is sick, you've done the right job.
Was like that an additional pressure or like a challenge to like step up?
I think it was like a challenge to step up, and also a pressure. I mean, there was pressure abounding in general. Getting to, we recorded the album in the same room Dark Side of the Moon was made, Revolver, Blonde by Frank Ocean, so there's that legacy. But then there's also, the pressure to make sure that I did something good. But I kind of wanted that, that's why I didn't go into this with I already know what I want the album to be. I was like, I want to spend this time. I've got 2 weeks in Broome to think about it, and then I've got 6 weeks in France to think about it. And that was, as amazing as the Abbey Road aspect was, being in France for 6 weeks with the whole band and having absolutely nothing to do but write an album was phenomenal. Like, here at home, I can't just be like, hey, everyone, no one work for 6 weeks. No one do anything else. We're just going to work on the album. That's what we
It's the romanticized version of making an album.
Yeah, which was totally idyllic, but I think we were also really stoked about it because we wanted to take it really seriously. And for example, our last album, Red Desert Dream, we had 13 songs and we put 13 songs on the album. This time we wanted to have too many songs and to experiment with all the things that we'd ever wanted to try, throw it at the wall, see what actually works, and then have a really difficult process of choosing what would be the album. So over the 6 weeks in France, we wrote 25 songs.
Okay.
And then had to distill that down to 13 songs, which was actually really hard, but I wanted it to be hard. I wanted it to be like, ouch, something.
What was hard about it?
I think that we actually were really happy with a lot of songs that we made. I think when we were deciding what the album would be, we had a bit of a diplomatic process of kind of everyone went away, had a big think about the 25 songs, and I created this, everyone put their top 10 in order on sheet of paper, and also what do you think the album should be called?
Mm-hmm.
And we were in agreement for 95% of the songs. We had undeniables. If 6 out of 6 of us voted for it, it's it's definitely on the album. But then once we got down to like, in the end, we tried to get 10. In the end, there was 13 songs. The last 3 songs, the vote variance between us was so wildly different. It'd be like the 6 of us voting for like different songs. So, you know, that's where it kind of got hard to pick the last ones and in the last order of things. But in the end, when we decided on what the album would be, I was walking, there was the Seine, so like the Paris, the French river, was kind of running through the town, and I'd kind of go for walks every day along that, and I was listening to the demos and in about 1,000 different orders and sequences to actually not just be like, oh, what are the songs, but like, oh, what's the story I'm trying to tell, and what's the energy of this album. And again, knowing that we would be, the first Aboriginal artist to do a record at Abbey Road, I had this feeling like we were getting the opportunity to go to Abbey Road, which is like, I guess the central nexus of rock and roll history and mythology really, and all the narrative of rock and roll stories that, you know, really stem from this place. But I was contemplating, here's this 100-year-old rich legacy, but I've been up in Broome connecting to a culture and legacy that goes back 60,000 years. What's cooler? But getting to bust into like the main nerve ending of rock history and the rock narrative and use that place to tell a First Nation story is what made it feel radical. And I was walking along the Seine and I had this feeling like I want the album to feel like a brick coming through the window. Like I want it to be like, you know, quite shocking. And I had the vision of the album cover, which is a hand holding a glass brick against a blue sky. And we had this song, Breaking Into Heaven, which is now the name of the album and is the opening track, that had only been voted for by 2 of us. And I had this moment where I remembered the Nina Simone quote, which is, the people who built their heaven on your land are telling you yours is in the sky.
Okay. Yeah.
As this whole idea of the music industry being like, you know, climbing this ladder or trying to climb up these industries that have still been built on stolen land in order to achieve some idea of success. And it was this kind of idea of like, you know, fuck all that. And what can I make happen myself? And again, this idea of breaking into it, that I had this sudden revelation that not only was Breaking Into Heaven supposed to be in the album, but it was the entire name of the album and the entire ethos of the album. And I had to, after having such a democratic process the whole time, I kind of had to go into the group like, this is happening.
Okay. Yeah. Well, how was that conversation?
I think there was a couple, you know, it was a bit wriggly, but I think at the end of the day, the whole band has a lot of respect for my, you know, leadership as the First Nation storyteller in the band.
Yeah.
And, you know, that I think everyone puts a lot of faith in, you know, my direction and my intentionality in the story that we're telling with our music. So that was that process.
Say more about like being the First Nations leader and storyteller of the band. Like, how did pulling the band together come about?
Well, I guess because Selve was founded by myself. You know, I guess it started by myself, and the first EP that we created was with myself and another collaborator, just one-on-one, when we made Snake of Light. And, you know, that was just formed out of songs that I've written, and then some of the band members joined then to kind of, you know, perform live with us. And then I guess, you know, band members have joined over time. Like, obviously, you know, Reese and I, who are in the band, and he's the other black fella in the band, we've known each other since we were in primary school. And we have, you know, just, I guess, the whole band knows and respects that is the main helm where the music is coming from, the source of the songwriting is coming from, the stories are coming from. But all of the band members who are not black fellas in the band, you know, they have a lot of, I guess, faith in what I have to say, and are all such incredible musicians that just want to bring those songs to life by contributing their skills to it as much as they can.
Yeah.
And maybe it would be a different world if I was like a Kevin Parker or something who could play every instrument. But really, I write songs and I can play a bit of guitar. And so it gives everyone their own total lane for expression. you know, where
Yeah.
their creativity gets to come out in the sonic contributions, but also in the songwriting structures. Like, I mean, Reese contributes heaps in on the album. You've got Forever, which is an entire piano piece composed by him, and we worked on some of the words together for that in Broom. And you know, it'll be a different environment sometimes. Like with this album, there were some songs that I'd brought. Here's a song that I have, let's turn this into a song. But there's sometimes where the band would be jamming and they will make a song and I will just respond lyrically in the
Cool.
moment.
Yeah.
So
So
I
it's
think
truly
it's
like collaborative.
Yeah.
But there are boundaries and structures to how that collaboration
definitely
works.
extremely creatively collaborative, but I think it's a very easy thing to navigate because it was already really well established that I was writing the songs and leading the storytelling by the time every member had joined, you know, so that's what everyone signed up for.
Tell me about the energy of being in the recording room at Abbey Road and moving from demo to putting down tracks.
Yeah. It was it was a big exciting process. So we wrapped up it in France after the 6 weeks of being there and the arduous process of choosing which songs would be on the record, and then we drove from France to London, which was pretty wild. We had hired a guy with a bus to take us over because it was cheaper than flying. And our first moment at Abbey Road was we were actually able to drop our gear off like the day before. So we had to just like kind of drop it off. It was taken into the studio and we didn't really get to check it all out. And then we, you know, just scuffled off home. And then our first day going in there, so we had at Abbey Road a few days in a smaller studio called the Gatehouse, which was like a new little studio that they've kind of built on the outside, which is smaller, about the size of this room, but still has incredible gear, where we spent a couple days doing some BVs and actually just properly planning out our recording plan.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Studio 3, which is where we recorded the album, we had 10 full days to record 13 songs. So we're like, we want to be strategic about it. There's not really much room for messing around.
Yeah.
But again, we had done ourselves the favor knowing, you know, this is one of the biggest moments of all of our lives. Let's all do ourselves the favor of being prepared. And we rehearsed to the nth degree in France because we knew we got to get in there, do our parts, go home, sleep, come back the next day, do our parts, go home, sleep. But it was... so I will say that we managed to like do a great job and knock everything out, but it was like overwhelming. There was like the first day we went to the proper studios, we were working with our engineer Thomas Briggs, and he took us on like the tour of the faculty. Like he took us into Studio 1, which is like giant orchestral level size, and it's like, yeah, this is where the Beatles did the White Album, and this is where this happened, and this is where XYZ band did this, and you're just kind of
really setting you up to be overwhelmed.
and he's like being real nonchalant about it, you know, and so just like, and then we finally got into Studio 3, and I think it went from being this idea in the future to being a reality. Like we'd kind of crossed a line, and you know, we walked into that room, and they were like, "Yeah, this is the desk the Dark Side of the Moon was made on." And, you know, we're just like, gah. And I think I remember me, Reese, and Creation, we just collapsed onto one of the couches. And I think we're actually just like overwhelmed. There were a few tears and, you know, a lot of joy, and a little bit of like, what the hell is going on? Like, is this real? It just seemed very, you know, when you grow up and something is kind of like on the fridge in the biggest way, you know, it's this far off, non-reality, idyllic kind of thing, and you've kind of walked into a fantasy realm, and then you're actually there.
Did you grow up listening to Dark Side of the Moon?
Yeah. I would say the Dark Side of the Moon was a really formative album for me in my teens, and my mum's a big Beatles fan as well, and I was very into the Beatles as well. And I really love Frank Ocean too, and a lot of the artists that have been through and come out of Abbey Road. So I'd always known of it. So it was definitely a big moment going in there. But at the same time, I had this huge feeling, you know, having just spent all that time in Broome, I just had this huge feeling that my ancestors were with me and that I was there for a reason, and that I deserved to be there because I was carrying something that was bigger than me. And obviously I was only there because of the legacy of First Nations artists who come before me, but that I was being given an opportunity to lay a stone in the path for future generations was like a really humbling and beautiful experience. But like, by the time we got to Abbey Road, I had spent hours and hours and hours making sure that I was confident in my lyrics and what I had to say. I say that though I was making alterations up to the very last minute, and doing like so many variant takes to our producers.
Who was producing?
So actually the producer for the record is our bassist, Scotty. So Scotty French, he runs a studio on the Gold Coast called Love Street Studios, and he's been a producer for about 15 years, and he's just one of those guys that makes you feel bad as a musician, as in like he can just do everything so very naturally. He's just one of those, he can play every instrument. He's a fantastic producer. He'll be like playing bass and like automating at the same time with the mouse sometimes, but he's also like the most modest mouse. Hates a compliment. He'll just like pull off the most incredible piece. He'll be like, Scotty, that's so good. He'll be like, don't look at me. So he got the opportunity to, produce the record at Abbey Road. And again, as part of my practice in the band, I really like to give the musicians in the band, who are all really talented, they challenge each other and help each other grow. And Scotty, who's only been with us for maybe 2 years, he's a bit ahead of us. He's a couple of years older than us, a bit more experienced than us. And I hadn't felt up to that point that I'd given Scotty something that could challenge him. And then says, well, how about producing a record at Abbey Road? And it's kind of like, okay.
Describe his role as producer for the band.
So basically, the first thing we produced with Scotty was our last EP, World Wide Wave, which has a couple songs on it, like Flaming Star and Sugar. And it was a really fun, different process, because our old creative process was we have our home studio in Talabudra, write a song, get it down, go to a studio, record it. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Scotty, we'd start just kind of going around to his studio, and this is when we actually started writing in studio. Because we can go to his studio for free kind of thing. And we'll be just like jamming and writing a song, but he'll actually be recording it and be like, oh, let's listen to it back and do all that kind of thing.
What is the difference writing in studio versus writing at home?
I think it is like, it's almost like you're kind of recording it as you're going. I think it's almost like when you're writing at home, you're not recording it so you can move on. Maybe you think, oh, that idea was no good, so you keep moving on. But with Scotty, he's kind of like always recording. He'll be like, no, let's listen back to that. And you'll be like, oh, that's good. And he's like, let's just work on that bit.
You get the feedback loop a little bit. Yeah.
It's a bit more refined, I'd say. And then so when we were in Midnight Special Records, that's what we were doing. Mm-hmm. So we would, he'd set up a studio session and we'd go in and we'd start workshopping an idea. And then just from workshopping it, then we'd go back and listen, and then we'd be like, oh, let's add this. So it was definitely an evolution for the band in how we write music, because I think it's much more direct. Yeah. And actually there's almost a lot more room for error. Like, a lot of the times if we're just jamming in studio, not in studio, so in our rehearsal studio, it'd be like we write a song, I come up with whatever lyrics I can at the time, and then maybe I listen back on a phone recording and try to like write it, whereas we can just demo out the structure of a song, and then I can just go in the booth and just sing over the top. Mm-hmm. I'll be like, all right, everyone go away, I'm going to spend an hour workshopping these lyrics, which is really, really fun for me, because I can think very fast on the fly, but being able to just like be like, all right, give me an hour with what we've just written and let's see what I can really do, really opened it up.
Is that your like preferred way of writing, or like your main way of writing is on the fly, or do you like have you had times where you'll go away, write on the bus, or like write for a day and
bit of column A and bit of column B, I'd say. I was lucky that before we went on this project, I'd had a 6-month poetry residency at Hodder as part of this Art Keeper program. So I have this book, Damn Good Television, which is a book of poetry that's getting published next year through Mauboy Books. And so I'd actually had about 6 months to explore all the poetic themes that I'd wanted to explore beforehand. And so I had a lot of ideas, and I had some things that maybe I'd already turned to songs. I had things that I'd written in Broome, and I had things that I was writing in the fly in France. And so I really like to be improvisational, just be carried by the energy and see kind of what comes out. And there's a lot of songs that kind of came from that, like the Loki Horror Picture Show, for example, is so rambly. And it was just like, I was just being silly as, well, I feel like blah, 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 and just like riffing. And all of that was made up. And I did like maybe 15 different versions, and I just picked the one that I liked the most. And then sometimes if I ran out of juice, I had my book Damn Good Television there, and I'd just like open to a random page and pick something. And that's how I wrote Natural Born Killer, which is like the heaviest song in the album, but it kind of draws on some of these ideas of destroying the Paul Hogan Australian dream and all that kind of stuff.
What's the difference for you between writing poetry and writing songs?
I feel like they're really closely related, because I'd almost say I am probably, I mean, I'm definitely both, but I would almost say I'm more of a poet and writer before I am a musician. Like the music comes really hard to me. Learning music and understanding music theory is quite hard to me, but writing and words come really easily to me. So I would say that one informs the other. I mean, I do, I'll sit with the guitar and come up with stuff as I go, 100%. But I also really like to like draw from something that's already written. But I find that they make different kinds of songs. So I like to have both. And I think with this whole creative process across France and across London, everywhere, that this was actually an opportunity, not like, okay, this is Selve's method of creating music. I felt like we actually created our methodology. And
cool.
Came out of it not with like one way, but almost like 5 different ways. Because we had this process in France where it was like we worked Monday to Friday, and on the weekends we'd go into Paris, go see some jazz. We went to Rock and Scene and saw like Massive Attack and LCD Sound System.
I went to Rock and Scene a few years ago as well.
That's crazy.
Amazing.
That was so crazy.
Great festival.
Oh, and we were really inspired by Massive Attack. Had this huge performance, and they'd just made their new visual show, which just had a lot of weight. They had a lot of really powerful observations about what was happening in Palestine and what was happening with, the what's it like? They were doing all this facial recognition stuff and just the way that data moshing is analyzed. They had this really powerful balance of incredible music and also strong message. And then we saw something like LCD Sound System, which was just so fun and wild and tight. So we were getting all this inspiration and kind of coming back. But because we were working from like Monday to Friday, we'd get together, and have breakfast in the morning and be like, all right, what kind of song are we writing today? And I had this provocation from my Uncle Wayne when I left Broome. He was like, if I can give you one piece of advice when writing music or performing music, it is ask yourself, what are you risking? Because if you're not risking anything, you're not putting your skin in the game. And if you're not putting your skin in the game, you're not making real vulnerable music. And I was like, okay, that's great. But that would kind of change every day. So let's say maybe one day we're like, all right, we're going to make a really punky, rock, bitey, kind of express some rage and speaking to power kind of music, which was like Natural Born Killer, for example, which is like, this is risky because it's kind of a battle song. But then we'll do that and be like, all right, now what's risky for us today? Let's make a really just like a pop love song, because the punk of yesterday would be like, I'm not going to make a pop song, or what would feel risky getting up in front of a punk crowd and singing?
For sure, yeah.
And it's like a really sensitive, a soft love song. And that was how I think I kept myself on my toes, by constantly contradicting ourselves. And maybe
being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next day it's like, all right, that was a really synth-heavy song. Let's make a just acoustic song. And then the next day it's a dance song. And so what are you risking kind of became a process of expansion through contradiction, I would say.
Okay.
And as far as our methods went, it might be, okay, yesterday we completely improvised. We don't have the brain juice for that. Okay, I have a song on acoustic guitar. Let's just build that out tomorrow. So it's almost like we had 3 or 4 different channels of ways of writing a song that we put into practice.
Is there, because this is a concept album as well,
yeah.
Is there a risk that it becomes almost fractured in its like tone with this method?
I think that, again, that was like the process of writing the 25 songs. And then when I chose the 13 songs and the track list, it was because I could see the through line in the story. It was almost like when we created the songs, we had all the pieces of the puzzle, but I still needed to put them into a sequence for it to be the concept.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like I went into it being like, oh, I know exactly what this album is
Yeah,
going to say.
you're not necessarily starting from the concept.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was kind of discovering it, I would say, but I could feel it's almost like when I was writing the book of poetry, my mentor was Wesley Enoch,
Mm-hmm.
and he was telling me, just write all your poems and then read them back and you'll find the thread.
Okay.
Find like the gold veins and you'll start to see what you're trying to say. Rather than like knowing exactly what you're trying to say, create and read back and you'll realize what your subconscious is trying to communicate or find that thing. And so I kind of had all these songs and I still had this idea of what I wanted it to be. And I was able to be like, oh, okay, now I can kind of see the story. And then it kind of came into formation. So although we cross a lot of genre in this album, I think that the album is put together in a cohesive way where the genres like, I think subtly crossfade into each other, except for a couple moments where we've taken some intentional L-shaped curves.
Yeah.
Like we have Loki Horror Picture Show goes straight into Natural Born Killer, which is like the silliest song straight into the heaviest song. But I kind of wanted a couple
It's got that
jolting
almost like
moments.
manic reasoning
Yeah.
behind it.
Yeah, definitely.
What talk me through the story of the album.
I would say, and again, a lot of stuff that has happened, like in retrospect, but I've written myself like a treatise on it. I would say that the album takes place over like 3 parts, kind of like a play. I would say that we've got the breaking into heaven concept, which is all about exploring and subverting the idea of a whole variety of false heavens and how they can and have been used to manipulate us over time. So you've got that Nina Simone quote, which is, the people who built their heaven on your land are telling you yours is in the sky. So this idea, politically, that when the colonizers came here, they declared terra nullius and tried to build their own heaven on our lands and have pushed us to the margins. And in order to, reclaim our lands, it's like we have to break back into that heaven, but we're having to break into our own heaven. And we had our own heaven before we were here. And the only fences around that heaven have been built by the colonizer.
Yeah.
And so it's this idea of subverting that. And then also you've got the history of obviously the missionaries in this country and the way in which the missions we used and certain religious ideologies we used to whitewash our culture and separate us from our culture. So there's a lot at the start of this album is about subverting probably the religious idea of heaven, and not necessarily attacking people's beliefs or whatever. People are entitled to that, but it's specifically the ideologies in the ways in which they've been used to create a sense of entitlement by which it's justified to have a genocide on people. We are the evangelists who are spreading the good news. So, and you guys are XYZ and you need to come into it. It's that sense of entitlement, especially the idea of a promised land, which is what happened on our country. It's what's happening in Palestine. It's what's happened over the world, all over the world. It's been the justification for so much bloodshed. So a lot of the probably the first 3 songs are about subverting and interrogating that idea. And I think I try to do that in the first few songs, not just by, it's kind of like the battle takes place in a realm of lyrics and ideas in my idea. We're going to get tangential here, but I'm going to try to go there.
This is good.
So you got like Rapture, which is like a really fun party rock, almost art versus science kind of album. But if you song, where you read the lyrics, it kind of details this scene where it's like the full-blown biblical apocalypse is happening. So, if you imagine God and the 1,000 chariots are kind of coming down to bring about the end times and Christ resurrecting to bring everyone back, XYZ. So that full kind of biblical apocalypse is going down, end of the world. But in the middle of the biblical apocalypse coming down, in this story, I've kind of got the ancestors returning to Earth and kind of saying, no, thank you, and like sending it back. And it's this idea of writing ourselves into that narrative, not to just be like, hey, that doesn't exist, but to affirm that it's not necessarily that any of those ideas are wrong, but we already have our own stories here. We already have our own stories on these lands that have been here for 60,000 years. And through the kind of a playful, lyrical way, I was just trying to take a bit of a victory over that ideology by prioritizing the narratives that already exist here. So the first kind of chapter, I guess, of Breaking into Heaven is about, I guess, subverting introduced ideologies and putting in their place our culture and our stories. And then the second chapter of Breaking into Heaven, or the second part, is kind of playfully titled The Rise and Fall of Romeo Jones. And it's about kind of subverting the other false heaven idea of kind of the world of Hollywood and the cult of celebrity and all this other kind of, this promised land of fame and success that everyone is chasing, while also being able to have some self-interrogation as an artist in a band who would like to be successful. It's not,
and what that means.
It's not just like turning the nose down, it's interrogating it while being in it, while being there at Abbey Road. And does this mean X, Y, and Z, or is this just the Kool-Aid, or is what, that kind of thing. So it kind of follows this character through a series of songs, basically from Leading Man Lost, Loki Horror Picture Show, Natural Born Killer, and Willem Dafoe, which are all these kind of Hollywood-esque references, which in my head is about this an Aboriginal actor who moves to Hollywood, plays in a bunch of films, does some good stuff, has quite successful, but then after a while they're living in Hollywood and then they're feeling far away from their land and far away from their people and their community and losing their center of gravity, maybe doing a couple gammon films and losing their way a little bit and then starting to lose their sense of identity, lose their sense of connection. So it's a examination of the dangers of biting into that apple of the cult of celebrity. And so that character, I would say, kind of goes through this arc of a high and then by Willem Dafoe into like a tragic low. And then I would say the whole third part of Breaking into Heaven is about the protagonist that has existed throughout it, returning home to culture and community and where they're really from and reconnecting to who they really are. And so that whole second half of the album almost really goes into this really soft space. It's like the whole first half of the album is all action, big bangers and songs, and then it hits Reflections in the Water, Catch My Breath, Friday Night, Forever, and Mauboy, which is, it almost turns into more of a piano album halfway through, and all of the songs are a lot more earnest and coming from this real space of the ember of culture and community, which was largely inspired by what I really took from my time in Broome. So my Jabirr Jabirr name is Junga Bilbil, which is a small like raptor that kind of hovers in the air like that. And the role of Junga Bilbil in community was to be the keeper of the fire. And it was the story of Junga Bilbil is kind of like before we knew how to make fire. Fire would be gathered from lightning strikes, basically. And the role of Junga Bilbil would be to keep those embers alive in a kulamon covered in a small layer of mud and actually take them from camp to camp and use them to light the fires. And if you let that go out, then there would be no food for X, Y, and Z. So it was an important job. And when I was up there with my Auntie Pat, she said to me that, my embers are the Jabirr Jabirr spirit in my blood, and the kulamons I keep them in are my songs, my poems, and my stories. And so I really took that into what I wanted this album to be. And Mauboy, which is the last song in the album, means good fire. And Mauboy is when fire explodes like that. So it's almost like, the whole album, there's a lot of different stuff I wanted to express. The entire spectrum, obviously, the whole band's personality is in there, but also myself. There is really silly songs, really, because I'm a really, I tried, sometimes I'm like, I could do some serious stuff, but I'm a really silly person. And I had to have that personality
into these different characters.
Exactly.
And
but they're all a part of who I really am. And it's not about one winning over the other, but it's like, okay, how can I channel those energies and still hopefully find a good moral in this story? And I feel like there's a nice, again, with a 3-part arc through the story of a lot of songs that have a lot of fight and are really trying to say something about what's happening in the world politically, culturally, subverting the ideas that I think are responsible for manipulating us and are leading to some of the bad things that are happening in the world. And an interrogation of some of the other things of the false heavens that the colonial society has built up, that everyone's running towards, and then is making people sick and lose connection with themselves. And then finally, hopefully, drawing a path for myself, for one, which is a return to center, return to home, identity, to who I am as a Jabirr Jabirr man, and finding healing through that. Ultimately, I think it's a healing album. So,
and do you hope people listen to the whole album
I do,
in this way? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, you can't control the fact that only X amount of people will listen to the whole thing. I mean, I think I tried
and you
to...
released singles, and like there's a release schedule and all of those things.
Exactly. I mean, I think a lot of the singles can stand alone, and I'm proud of them. It's not like I'm like would be upset if someone's only listening to one, but I think if anyone really wants to connect to the music and understand what I'm really trying to say, then listening to the album would be the whole thing. But that's the thing. Whatever percentage of people will listen to that whole thing, I know what I'm trying to say, I know where I'm trying to come from, and if people take the time to listen and connect to that, I'll be really excited, but I've got no control.
Yeah, art is like a two-way intent and reception.
That's
like,
right.
In comparison to like the earlier work, how would you sort of see the difference in approach? Like, have you matured as an artist, or has your sound grown?
I think both are true. I think that, again, like our first album was very much, we've got 13 songs, let's put it in. So we just that was everything that we had at the time.
That was the visual album.
Well, yeah, the visual album. So Red Desert Dream in full, so it was 13 songs. And then when Alethea and I made the Red Desert Dream visual album, it was of 5 or 6 of the songs. But again, like similar, like a lot of our songwriting is very cinematic. And there's a lot of film influences because I'm a huge cinephile and everything like that. And we've always wanted there to be a big visual narrative to correspond with the album. And Red Desert Dream was the first of that. And again, I think people, if they listen to both, will see a lot of relationship between the two. But I think that by Breaking Into Heaven, I definitely evolved as a writer. Again, getting to have basically a 6-month training ground of writing so many poems. Again, with the album, 25 songs reduced to 13. I got like a book of probably 100 poems down from like 1,000 or something.
Amazing.
Like just having 6 months to do nothing but write poetry and get paid for it was like crazy. So I would say I definitely evolved as a writer, and the band has definitely evolved sonically. And that's just all of the musicians growing as we all play and tour and go forward. But also Scotty, our producer, has been a huge force in evolving our creative practice in terms of songwriting in the studio, and just his dexterity and amazing skill as a producer. He's produced it so well. And I think we learnt a bit better how to do less, even though a lot of these songs are still very full on. There's a lot of the songs that just have a lot more space. I think in the past, and there's probably still a couple songs where I'm definitely guilty of it, of like cramming words into every perceivable nook and cranny.
Oh, for sure. Like not leaving the space.
Exactly, exactly. But I think that we did a bit better with this album to create more dynamic, which was a huge thing.
Conceptually, like, I've always seen with your work, like, huge elements of like self-actualization within the character work. And talk to me about that.
Well, yeah, I guess I think that creating an album is like a really big process of self-actualization, because it really is a program that can, a process that can take years. So it becomes like, I guess, a creative work becomes like your companion over that period of time. Like Red Desert Dream was 3 years from when we made it to when it came out, whereas this has been 1 year. But it's almost like Red Desert Dream, I listened back to a year ago, and I was like realizing in retrospect, oh, that's what I was talking about. That makes sense to me now.
And with the like visuals and sort of cinematic approach being such a big part of both of these albums and even your earlier work, like, is that a big part of it as well? Is like getting to then, you've embodied these characters in the words and in the music, and then bringing them to life. Yeah,
I think, I really love making like universes around the work. Like I would say that all the characters from Breaking Into Heaven, Red Desert Dream, The Neon Parable of the Pink Hotel, and Snake of Light all exist in the same world. And I've got writings where those characters interact. And in Damn Good Television, the book, it actually draws on all the characters from, there's a chapter called Snake Alight and all this kind of stuff where all these characters interact. So to bring that to life, like I'm always almost like pretending like I'm writing a movie.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
then
And are
to
they
actually,
versions of you, or
there
are
definitely
they
would, I'd say,
projections?
yeah, I would say there'd be versions of me. I mean, the idea for the band name Selve comes from the idea that every person is like a multiplicity.
Mhm.
You know, we are made of a multitude of selves. We've got so many different voices and identities within ourselves that like sinews form the whole of who we are, and getting to sometimes embody a character which doesn't feel like you at all, but it's almost like, you know, I can write a poem from this character who feels nothing like me, and then read it back and figure out that that character had something to say to me, or that I had something to learn from embodying that emotion or that archetype, or where that kind of comes from. So I definitely find, you know, the process of songwriting, poetry, and creating an album is definitely a process of self-actualization, because it's like having a dream and reading it back. You're like, oh, I don't know what that means, but I feel like it means something, and that crystallizes over time.
Yeah. Is it like a constructed projection version of, like, is there a true version of Loki that
Definitely.
doesn't come out, or that gets hidden?
No, I
or
would
like
say
does that come out as well?
I would say that is definitely, I mean, in all of it, and especially comes out when I think when we're performing, I'm very scarcely playing a character. I think that the songs have different moods. I'm just, you know, myself in different tones. And I mean, you know, that was part of making the Loki Horror Picture Show as well. I was like, I've got so many characters. Like, yeah, where's Loki?
Yeah.
And to talk about myself in the third person, which I also did in Damn Good Television. It's in 7 parts. You got like Snake of Light, Leading Man Lost, all these various things. And then I was like, all right, I'm writing from the perspective of all these characters. And then I wrote one thing which is called Everything is Everything, which is just very much from my own voice. And I really did strive to, okay, sometimes I can be over conceptual. How do I like humanize this and actually be a bit more conversational? And there's a few songs I would say where I really strove to do that on this album, which were Butterfly, Loki Horror Picture Show, and what else? Forever, largely. I mean, Forever is the song I'm proudest of on the album. That's the main song I wrote in Jabirr Jabirr Country, and it's about the spirit of country, calling you home. And it's just very much my story and the story of my family and the story of my ancestors. So, you know, I definitely tried to come from a very sincere place in some of the songs and a very silly place in some of the songs and all that. But yeah, I would say that they're characters, but they're all facets of myself. But I learn a lot about myself through the characters. Because, I don't know, sometimes, whether subconsciously or not, your idea of who you are is a character that you're playing as well. And you can box yourself into, well, this is what I would say, and I wouldn't do this kind of thing. And then you write it from a character who's opposite to you. And it's just like, maybe those elements of yourself that you don't allow yourself to be will communicate themselves through those characters. And yes, that comes back to that process of self-realization.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. When you are taking songs from like studio to performance and live, what do you take with you and what do you leave behind?
It's a very good question. From studio to performing live, I mean, I feel like there's like a process of you kind of go from trying to make a song exactly, play a song live exactly what it's like in studio, which is a nice vibe if you can articulate it perfectly. But I feel like you actually learn a lot more about what a song is once you take it to stage, because I think songs are relational as well. Exist in isolation. I mean, we're lucky we've got a 6-piece band, so it is a relational process where the song touches so many personalities by the time it comes whole. But once you see the way a song interacts with the crowd, it starts, I don't know, taking on a different formation. You know how it's presented. So again, I wouldn't say it's too preconceived. I think that you keep learning about what a song is and what a song means for like years to come, because it's like a living thing,
and it grows over that time.
Yeah, definitely.
How did that process work with working with the orchestra as well?
So yeah, that was a big process. Again, and that kind of connects back to the visuals that you were talking about as well. So we kind of came back from London and having toured. We toured after that. We toured the UK and Germany. We landed back home and we had an album recorded at Abbey Road. We were still independent, self-managed. Now we've got no money because the grant's all gone. What are we doing? I was like, how do I get this out? Tried to, knock on a couple doors, talk to some labels, managers, like, hey, we've got an Abbey Road album. Does anyone want to help? And it was like, not really. And I was like, fuck, what's a black fella have to do to get some traction around here? We've got an Abbey Road album, anyone? And I was like, that's all right. I've come this far myself. I'm going to keep just doing it from a sovereign practice. And that's what I can control. Can't control what's happening externally, but I can make good art.
Mm-hmm.
And so I applied for funding on the Gold Coast. Luckily, there was this thing called the EGC Fund, which was a brand new fund and a very big one to basically create a performance outcome on the Gold Coast. And I applied for the full funding, and what we got to do was a launch of Breaking Into Heaven at Bleach Festival with a 33-piece orchestra, but I also pitched making a really immersive visual show for it. And through making that visual show, I was able to also pitch, like, I'll make the visual show, it'll be like a full thing to go with the show, but I'll also use those as our music videos. So through that, we got to do a really large-scale production, which was amazing. Again, we call it the SCU, the Selve Cinematic Universe. I worked very closely with a long friend and collaborator, Joshua Tate, who's a fantastic director.
Mm-hmm.
Has worked with Kate Miller-Heike and Jacques Wajons and a bunch of incredible artists, Psycho and that kind of thing. And they were traveling with us, making the documentary. But this was my first time actually co-directing the music videos. So
how did you feel like stepping into that role?
I felt really excited because I'd been a producer on sets and stuff before, but I'm really passionate about film, but you always kind of feel like, oh, that's a bit of a daunting realm and it's such a big process. But Josh was really passionate about using their skill set and technical knowledge and direction knowledge to help me, again, to tell my story and to articulate these songs into a visual place. So basically, Josh and I would have a lot of sit-downs and chats, and I wrote the ideas for all of the songs. Or maybe I would have like really out there ideas and be like, can we do this? And Josh would be like, no. But funnily enough, I was like, can we get a propeller plane and fly it into the sky to break into heaven? And Josh was like, sure. And we did that in Breaking Into Heaven. So, really, I didn't quite... different to Red Desert Dream, which was that was all directed and written by Alethea, but that was like a whole visual narrative that was interconnected. These videos that I wrote, they're not so much a visual album, but they all exist in the same universe.
Yeah.
They have a relationship to each other, but we just wanted to release them as individual things, as their own thing, and to touch on a whole bunch of different realms. We got to do a lot of cool stuff, like Breaking Into Heaven has a cameo from Uncle Richard Bell at the start. We got to work with Charlie Fraser in Leading Man Lost, which was really good, and we got to work really closely with Choral Projects, which is Thomas Kelly and Tari and all that. Those mob from up in the Gold Coast, which was really beautiful. They were in 2 of the music videos, but also for the live show, we shot almost like 8 videos of live dance, and there's still one video to come out, Natural Born Killer, which is just me and Thomas, which is coming out next week actually.
How did you like prepare working with dancers to kind of bring things to life and like directing I think dancers?
With Choral Projects, I kind of were just like, here are the songs, Thomas. This is what we're going to be doing. I really didn't want to over direct. Really wanted to collaborate with Choral Projects because I know that they're amazing and that they can do incredible stuff. And I was really more interested in their response to the musical content.
Yeah.
Within the parameters, I'd kind of be like, all right, for these songs, we're just in a black box.
So it's almost like creative directing rather than going, puppet
Definitely.
style.
And so Thomas, let's say the first video we did, which was Breaking Into Heaven, so that was probably the wildest one. That was the one that's in South by Southwest. We went out to the Coralban airstrip, which is about 2 hours drive outside of the Gold Coast, a private airstrip. And we actually went there and we're just like to the guys like, hey, can we shoot a music video here? They were like, yeah, we just bought it 2 weeks ago. You know what? Let's do it. And you know what? I know some local pilots. They'll probably want to fly it. We're like, okay.
Okay.
They were just excited to be in a music video and stuff. I was like, can we print designs and put magnets on your plane? They were like, sure. And so, we went out there. We had the idea for Breaking Into Heaven was like, it's a blackfella flying academy, literally breaking into heaven to take over the center of narrative control is my kind of backstory. And it starts with Uncle Richard as what I call the radical commander. He's got this big aero flight suit, a big cigar, and he's kind of giving the speech at the start for us all.
How did you pitch that to Uncle Richard?
I said, Uncle Richard, I'm doing a music video about blackfellas breaking into heaven with an airplane, and I want you to be the radical commander with a cigar, and these are the lines you're going to say. He was like, fuck yeah. and it was great. I mean, again, I've worked with Uncle Richard a bunch before and we're great friends. And it was such a pleasure and an honor working with him. And it was a process of acknowledgement because, as I said, I don't know if I would have applied for this project if it weren't for that advice from Uncle Richard and that encouragement and context from Uncle Richard. So to open, Breaking Into Heaven was the first single and the first music video, and the first thing you see is Uncle Richard is to be a kind of acknowledgement of those who've paved the way in the most badass way that I could imagine. And it was so fun working with him because he's such a diva, but in a playful way. I'd be like, okay, Uncle Richard, action. He'd be like, don't tell me what to do. And there was this great moment where, so the cool thing about Breaking Into Heaven, it's all shot in like a one shot. Actually, there's two shots technically, but what was fun about it is it's all shot in a drone. So it's this drone, and we've got this billboard, which is the album cover, and then it comes over and you've got the choral dancers. They're doing this choreography on the runway, and then you got the band over there. So there's almost like 5 stations of shooting, and then the camera kind of goes off. And the last thing is I run towards the plane. There's a sneaky little cut shot, and then I've got like one of these cameras that is strapped to the chest, and then I'm in the plane. It looks like I fly it off, but there's a guy sitting next to me, but you can't see him. But because it's a one take, it was funny. There were multiple funny things filming with Uncle Richard. We only got 3 shots because we were losing the light. And the drone kept going past Uncle Richard in his position, and he'd just, he'd kind of like flinch and kind of be, what's this? We're like, that's all right, we'll go again. But my favorite moment was when we're getting to the bit, we've got through the take, and I'm running towards the plane because I had to run ahead of the camera. And Uncle Richard's position is kind of like standing, in position near the camera. And I'm running towards him, and he's looking at all of us dancing and all that, and he's standing by the wing. And I'm running towards Uncle Richard, and he's just got his phone out, and he's just like filming us all. He's like, how good's this? And I was like, Uncle Richard, put your phone away, get it. You're in the shot. Yeah, we're on camera.
Yeah,
but that was really fun. But again, to circle back to choral projects there, I had sent the song to choral projects. They made like the main steps. They had like the main movements, but Thomas had come prepared. He was like, this is what I've got, what I'm thinking for the chorus, but let's adapt to the space. And he'd kind of look at the space and he'd kind of be like, I'm thinking this formation. He had so many great ideas. I was like, I guess everyone stands in a line. He was like, he looked at it all. He was like, nah, you want everyone in triangle formation. It's got like a kind of, a pilot kind of vibe. So he had what he'd brought to the thing, but he was also really responsive to the space.
Cool.
And that was really awesome. And it was kind of like that for each one that we did. Strange Romance was very much that way as well. But we also had one that was completely improvisational. So natural.
How do you bring that trust? How do you trust people in that space?
Well, I mean, I've known Thomas for a number of years, and we've worked together in a bunch of things, and I've obviously seen Ollie's work. But again, I think that is a part of my method of like, I have a vision. I have an idea of what I want to do, but I also I love working with people who can take a suggestion I have and contribute an idea that is way better than anything I'd ever think. If we go back to the music, I might say to Reese, I'm kind of thinking this or this for the guitar, and they'll be like, how about not that and completely this? And I'll be like,
extrapolate or iterate on what you've...
That's way better.
Yeah.
And it's the same with, like I had the idea of the shooting at the airstrip and the whole plane idea to Josh. And then Josh was like, but what if we shot it on a drone? And I was like, oh, that'd be amazing. And that's what made its point of difference. That's why it's got the Rage feature video. That's why it's in here. Because to have a concept but trust in other people's way of delivering that, and to be able to take your seed and turn it into something you couldn't even imagine. So I'm really excited by that. And I think that when you give people that trust to put their personality into it, they'll care about it more. And they'll put more of themselves into it than if you just tell them what to do. If I was like, Thomas, do X, Y, Z, he might be like, yeah, okay. Or if I'm like, Thomas, here's the song, what would you do? Then I'm going to get something I think, far better, especially when it's not my field. Like if it's dance, I don't know what I'm freaking talking about with dance, but so I would trust in someone who knows more to be able to deliver something. Or Scotty producing. I don't know, we could have hired a really established producer, and we're one little band of 20 that they're working with in 3 months. And so the priority level we're going to get versus someone who has never had the opportunity to work at Abbey Road and therefore is going to treat it with such a higher level of reverence and respect because it's something that they can connect to as well. So I think that trust in other people's creativity is a part of the process because it just proves itself to be worth its salt time and time again.
Is songwriting a muscle that you like train and flex, or is it something that's natural?
Definitely train and flex. I think that get better and more fluid the more and more you do it. And I also think songwriters or creatives in general can, the biggest trap is perfectionism and wanting something to be perfect, or you can feel that if the first song you write you want it to be the best thing to ever grace the earth, but you definitely, you got to go through 100 songs maybe to get to one good song.
Yeah.
And I think that developing a healthy sense of just writing lots, whether it be songwriting lots or poem writing lots, to get that healthy sense of abandon. So if you write a song and you're like, this is shit, you can just chuck it away and it's like it's no skin off your back. And I think that what that creates is fluidity, because I think as a writer you want to move like a river rather than chunk along like blocks of ice that you're hacking off into something. And if you get like momentum from writing lots, then I think it's just like it's like strengthening any muscle. And then
How old were you when you first started writing?
I think I started writing stories and stuff properly when I was like 15. I would have started writing stories, and then I would have started writing poems maybe when I was 16, 17. And then I started playing guitar when I was 17, or started learning guitar when I was 17. And I found it really hard. I was like, I'm going to pick this up. I'm going to be writing songs in no time. But it took me a long time really to be even able to, I put it down and picked it up. And I probably didn't take it seriously until I was 21.
Did you do lessons, or
I didn't do any lessons. I think I was of the naive adolescent, idea. I was like, Jimi Hendrix didn't have any lessons. I'll just teach myself. And then 10 years later, I'm like, I should have got those lessons.
You do lessons now?
No, I don't. But I do some kind of online lessons and stuff. I've been able to teach myself enough to be a songwriter, but not necessarily like an adept guitarist. I'm not playing the lead lines or anything like that, but I can write the chord progressions. I would say I probably can confidently say I wrote my first song at about 21, which was Naya, which is in our first EP. And then from then it's definitely been an art of honing it in over time, and it definitely gets stronger the more you do it.
What was growing up like for you?
Growing up for me was I kind of really love my childhood. We moved around a lot, so I was raised mainly by my mum, who was a single mother, had me when she was 21, but I moved between hers and my dad's. So I was born in Perth with mum. So our mom's from up in Broome, but she's always lived down in Perth, and I was born in Perth. And then we moved to Newcastle when I was about 1 year old. She wanted to kind of get away from Perth for her own reasons, and she was studying medicine. So mum's a GP, and she moved to Newcastle to be closer to my dad, and then for me to be closer to dad. And then they split up when I was about 1, which was good, I think, because you grow up not experiencing a breakup. You just grow up, mum's over here, dad's over here.
Sure.
And that's perfectly normal.
That's the
norm.
The norm. Yeah.
I can't actually, imagining my parents together is weird. But so I kind of grew up between both of them. But yeah, we moved around a lot. So I went to probably like 8 schools and would have lived in over like 50 different houses, because my parents were both 21 and moving around themselves, and I was moving in between them. So I grew up, for the first years of primary school in Newcastle, and then I lived in Sydney. I went to Maroubra Primary School and Chifley School for a couple of years, and then I was back in Newcastle, and then I went to Gloucester in New South Wales, which is where I met Reese in primary school. And then I moved up to the Gold Coast probably in 2010 and finished high school there.
Yeah.
So not really many creatives in my immediate family, as in mum is more academic and medicine focused, and my dad is into... My dad is my favorite nerd. He worked in the RAF as like a radar technician, which probably inspired my song Radar. He was also in the second top guild in Australia for World of Warcraft.
Okay.
So
Cool.
he loves his games. He always tells me the story. He was so serious about WoW. He once sold his account for like $4,000, and then got really sad and bought it back for $5,000. So,
Great investment.
But that said, with all the mob up in Broome, so whenever I go up and am hanging out with the mob up there, you've got like Arnie Mitch Torres, who's like a filmmaker she was the reporter in Barbecue Area, and she's done the story of Jundamara and all these filmmakers, and then Arnie Eileen, who is the producer for all that. You got Arnie Pat, who is an academic and a linguist who speaks like 7 different Indigenous languages. And then you got Uncle Wayne, who's a filmmaker and a musician and all this. So although I haven't grown up around it in my immediate family, all the Jabirr Jabirr mob are extremely incredible storytellers who are established in their fields.
How much time did you spend with them?
I have known the family throughout my life, but I've only actually went back to Broome for the first time in 2023.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. And I was planning on going back earlier. Again, it's just a big thing of being on the East Coast. I would go to Perth every Christmas because my nan lived there in Yokon. I would go there every Christmas to see my nana and other relatives who live down in Perth, because a lot of the mob down in Perth. But then she passed away in kind of 2008. And then I just didn't really get over to WA for very long or have the opportunity to go up there. I tried to go in 2020, but then wasn't able to get there because of the community being locked down and all that kind of thing. And it's...
What was the impetus for going?
I think that I finally, I'd been like having a series of, yarning more often with Arnie Pat and Arnie Mitch a lot throughout late 2010s and 2000s, and I'd kind of been planning to kind of go up for a long time, but I'd just really been very busy with the band and with work, and it's very expensive to get up to Broome. The difference between flying to Broome and France is about $200, which is crazy. So I had enough money to go there, and me and my mum went up there, and we just spent a couple weeks with Arnie Pat. Went camping out on country, which was really beautiful. And then since going the first time, I've probably been back like 6 times.
Amazing.
So I was only there. So obviously I went there for the start of the album stuff, and then I went there again. Only like a month or so ago in August, and there's a big family camp out there, and there's a lot of things I want to get involved there. There's a lot of like language revitalization, and Arnie Pat's making a Jabirr Jabirr language dictionary, and there's a lot of projects that I think I'll be getting involved in over there in the years to come, which is really epic.
Just describe the the feeling of going back to somewhere ancestral like that.
Like extremely moving. Like, I mean, I've been, I guess, wanting to go back for years and years and years, and getting actually taken out there by, Arnie Pat was extremely emotional spending time out at Winnewall or Minnering. It's that place of, that feeling of going to the places where your ancestors have lived since time immemorial, and the place, standing in a place that you're made from, and really feeling that sense of, oh, this is where I come from, this is where I am, that sense of returning home. And they say it makes my Leon happy, which is making my spirit happy.
Yeah.
And I think I draw a lot of strength from it.
Yeah.
I think when I went there the first time, I was really burnt out. and I really needed some restoration. And just from a couple of days of being there, I feel like I got
Was
really
it like
charged up.
restoration you didn't even know you needed?
Definitely. Maybe I thought I needed, this much restoration, but I actually got like this much restoration. So,
and like, did it change you as a person? Like,
I think definitely. I think it just really grounded me in who I am, and also made sense of like a lot of certain things. Like, main thing going back to Country Auntie Pat, we should always talk about, that your messages from the ancestors will come through your dreams, and they come through all this. And, there'd be little things like talking about like even maybe characters or stories I'd been talking about in my music or poems, and I'd tell her about something like that. She'd be like, oh, well, that's this. Snake of Light, for example, our first EP is about like almost like a were snake. Like, instead of a werewolf, someone who turns into this snake of light. And we went up, and my auntie Pat took me to this place called Walmadung, which is the place of the Snake Man. And there was just all these like full circle moments that happen there, which I think go to show, I don't know, the way in which the ancestors guide us through things we can't explain to get back to where we need to be.
Yeah, and was that kind of mind blowing?
It's blowing my mind every time I go, and every time I go, there's something new,
like another layer, kind of. Yeah, amazing.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
With the poetry side of things, how did you decide to write work into a book, or was the poetry like did you write for performance?
So for, I guess, because I've got a history of spoken word, definitely got a history of spoken word poetry. I used to host a poetry event called Alternator Poetry on the Gold Coast, and have won various slams and all that kind of thing. And because I hosted it for so long, for like 2 years, I started, I think if you're oversaturated with anything, you end up tiring of it. And I kind of got maybe oversaturated by myself with the slam format for a while. Sometimes there's a cadence or a melody to it that always sounds the same and all this kind of thing. And I was like, all right, I really wanted to go in the opposite direction and write for page. So all of the poems in Damn Good Television, I almost tried to condense to like just a page each. Whereas the form of writing, like even like a 2-minute poem, that's like 10 pages. It's a really long thing, which has a totally different style because it's meant to be spoken out loud.
To be heard.
Whereas sitting and reading something that maybe only has like 4 stanzas but makes you go, where you've kind of like, condensed each phrase down to an oil that really makes someone think, is kind of what I wanted to do as kind of like a meditative process, to not just try to like smash a poem out, but just like slowly go at it and like fold it like metal until it feels like it's really dense and that kind of thing. So I think I was really aware of that. I was writing for page and for whoever was reading it to have that experience, because it is like another relational thing where you can write for yourself, which is true, but you're also writing for yourself in connection to whoever's reading for you. So I do try to think about what their experience will be.
Yeah.
And again, I just kind of didn't have I had some ideas of how I wanted to put it together, but I really just kind of wrote every day and I gave myself a deadline. I was just going to write until this point, and then at that point I had to stop and I had to turn it into something and put those poems together. And I mean, poetry, because it's not a narrative.
Turn it into the book?
Turn it into the book, yeah.
Okay, yeah, right.
So I had like, it's in 7... Damn Good Television's in like 7 collections of different poems, all that are poetry collections, which are all to a different theme, but I'm calling them seasons because it's a TV thing, and that's very clever. And so I kind of had like this whole 3-paneled wall where I had each, theme, and then I would have all the poems and like put them up in the wall. It was like a mad, that meme with all of the strings and that kind of thing. It really was that. And then been like, this connects to this.
Poetry.
Yeah, exactly. Poems. But because it's not like a narrative that has to make a degree of sense, like it is very interpretive poetry. So, I was able to piece together. Again, I like to have a bit of a thread for myself. Someone else might perceive it entirely differently, but I kind of know where I'm coming from. But I am interested in how that another person's thread.
With poetry being like a much more solo practice as compared to like writing with the band. Is it a different muscle that you are working with, or is it
Definitely?
Yeah.
I think because there's a term, like, I think so many different art mediums have a different like delay time on gratification.
Yeah.
Like if you're making a film, that's going to take you like 3 years to get like a feedback, like, and hopefully the audience claps, like, and then in a song, okay, you've got to write it, demo it, record it, release it, promote it, perform it, clap, and then until you get that feedback loop. Whereas with a poem, you just sit, write a page, and you're like, that's done. Even obviously, hopefully you get someone, but as for a poem to be done, you just have to write it. So there's a lot more, and I think it really feeds the longer release process of like an album to be able to have something else that's a bit more instantly gratifying.
Yeah.
And I think with poetry, I'm less concerned about it doing well or success. Like I think with the band, I obviously would love to make music for my whole life. So I want the band to have a career where we can continue making great albums and we can tour and do XYZ indefinitely, which requires a certain degree of success and for it to actually go well. So I really want that. And I will be upset if that doesn't happen. I don't like, you can get to a thing to acknowledge that you can't control it, but I think you have to be honest with yourself as well. Sometimes people like pretend that they don't care, and that irks me because you don't spend hundreds of hours doing something if you don't care.
Yes.
I don't like the pretense as an artist of pretending you don't care, because if anything, it's a sign of how much you care when you're pretending that you don't care. But with poetry, I just love doing it for the sake of doing it. It's how I process my emotions. It's how I think. It's how I understand the world around me. So it's great that we have a book out, and I'm very much looking forward to the book coming out. But like, if it doesn't sell well, I'm not going to beat myself up.
Yeah, and like traditionally, poetry is not the best selling of mediums.
I'm not getting any mentions from that. Yeah.
Would you share a piece from the book?
I'll read. This is the poem. I mean, I can read a couple, but this one is called "That's Not a Knife," and it became Natural Born Killer in the album, but to show like that creative process. And if you look at the lyrics, they're a little bit different. Like I just shape it to fit the melody of it and everything. But this poem became Natural Born Killer. I am the crocodile who ate Paul Hogan and made a bone shrine out of the Home and Away cast down in my mud cave. I smoke a rolled-up T-shirt shoulder pack of Marlboro Reds as I unleash my rage on Summer Bay. The skeletons of burnt cars line the highway I fang down to crash with a mighty crack right into Mad Max's back, reversing over AC/DC in a flaming trail of midnight oil, leaving Bowie dancing in the desert with red shoes gone. I am the crocodile who drags, rips, and rolls the ARIA charts, broadcast screaming live like a drive-in cinema horror movie. I surface like Jaws from the land and swallow Parliament whole. Report me to the ABC authorities if you like. I have already receded into the water dreaming, back down underwater for feeding.
Amazing. Yeah. A lot of references.
A lot of references. Again, damn good television is probably very reference laden.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of, you can call it a cinephile, but I just watch a lot of TV, but I like using characters from popular culture within the stories and interacting with them because they're loaded characters. Yeah. So they come with a lot of things. Like this poem is about, again, with this whole idea of the false heavens. So the whole Paul Hogan advertising shrimp on the Barbie thing was a whole advertising campaign that came out in the 80s, which was about making the world perceive Australia as this ideal holiday location, which was all, g'day, mate, I'm a blonde white guy, come over to Australia, it's great. And they created this false heaven, this fictitious representation of Australia that had nothing to do with Aboriginal people.
Yeah.
And so this, although it might seem like a bit of a violent poem, it's violent in the terms of that it's just trying to destroy that idea of the Australian dream.
Yeah. Yeah.
which is just a concept and this false narrative that has been, perpetuated across generations. And using those referential characters is a way of doing that because they come with all of these psychological.
They have baggage.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Will you? I mean, do you worry that it sets it in a certain sort of time period for a generation, or like do you see these as some references that are gonna like transcend things?
I think that hopefully I try to write them. I mean, that one again is very specifically reference laden. I would hope that I sometimes write references into my poems that if they were just read, it would just seem like a metaphor to someone who doesn't know what it means.
Yeah.
And there are a lot more, contemporary references in some of this stuff that, go to like characters right now. I mean, this is from the first chapter of the book, which is called Channel Surfer, which is almost very much like you're flicking through the TV and all the icon,
Yeah, it's like you've got the toothpicks in, and
exactly. So there's a lot of, it's like very upfront with a lot of that stuff, like there's one here called Interview with a Vampire and all this kind of stuff.
Would you read that?
Interview with a Vampire, I'll find a different one to that. This one, which is from Everything is Everything, it's called Orpheus and Adidas.
Cool. Okay.
Dishes undone, clothes everywhere, sitting in my underwear at the end of the bed. Where do I even start with this mess? Scattered philosophies on the wall, an urge for revolution in a heap by the door. God knows what's under the mattress, probably half-written songs and poems that go too long. Love I never made and things I never said to those I made it with. Unanswered questions left defenseless by acid-fried toast with burnt edges, crumbs of chips, myths, guitar picks, and visions scrunched in the recycle bin. Looking up through the manky-ass curtain comes the light. Perfect flakes of chaos dust dancing before my eyes. My hand passes through the bedroom stars, and I fall back with a 1,000-yard sigh. Glory be to thee, holy ceiling fan. You know even more about me than the mirror in the corner, which I swear is getting older. O pillow, ancient lover, let me rest my head in your breast and flutter forever in my Piscean dreams, or some such shit that I say to myself, as I neglect to lay a single finger on the sacred mess I am.
Amazing. Right. When you named that, was that like a guide for people reading?
I actually, throughout this whole book of poetry, I would often write the poem first and then do the title last. And I really liked, it's almost like it's the last cherry you can put on a thing, and it can entirely change the context or how you perceive a poem. Sometimes like that for me is the combination of, Orpheus is like, demigod of music with something like wearing Adidas trackies, really casual, and you're in your bedroom with like, there's mess everywhere. It's like grounding something that seems like ethereal with something very, banal and real that I think really can humanize something. So I think that's what I was going for with this. But I mean, this is probably I would sometimes have a poem that seemed it was all the way over here and name it something like all the way over here, because the connection you have to make between the title and the thing almost creates a whole nother picture.
Yeah.
It's like just with the title, you can change the entire tone and color of a poem. So I had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we jump back to the album and talk about the sort of inspirations for making it musically.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, musically, for sure.
Did you said you were like locking yourselves down for the week, Monday to Friday, and then going out into Paris and jazz and stuff. But were you, as a band, listening to work together and going, what do I like about this? Breaking things down?
I'd say that's, also one of the fun things, we're a 6-piece band with a variety of music tastes. Like everyone likes very different stuff, and then we come together, and then that soup of influences becomes something that's very us. Like I think we cross a lot of genre, but it always sounds very much like Selve, and that's just like the rare combination. But I would say, what were some things that had come out at the time? I think Romance by Fontaines DC
Okay.
had just come out at the time, which I thought was really awesome. And again, I think there was a gravity to that album that I really liked, and a sonic style. There was like a leaning into ugliness. You got like something by, I don't know, like an artist like Tame Impala or something, which is really beautiful, but it's so polished.
Yeah.
And then you have something, Fontaine's coming out with some stuff that they had some great hits on there, but some of it is almost like rough and ugly and confrontational in that context, which is that kind of punk element. And that there was a lot in this album that I wanted to be confrontational, like Breaking Into Heaven and Natural Born Killer. But again, I think I'd listened to that and I was like, oh yeah, I like that attitude. And there was maybe a bit of me that was mirroring that attitude. And then I was like, I'm mirroring this attitude. And then I was like,
this is contrived.
I'm going to be a goose. That's like, I would sometimes like imagining, here's a few artists that I really respect, that I would really like to impress. And so what would that look like? That'd look like X, Y, Z. And then just come out with this doing like, so comfortable doing like an arms flailing silly thing that they would think is stupid, but by doing that, or upsetting an idea of what I think people I respect would respect, was really liberating in how I would connect to my authenticity.
Yeah.
So that again, that's the contrast. Songs like Lucky Horror Picture Show, Butterfly, which are the really lighthearted and playful, but as such, having joy in this album was something I really wanted to.
Do you get self-conscious?
I think I get self-critical. I think I'm very comfortable performing. I think.
What about when you like first putting down or first sharing a set of lyrics with people? Like, is that
definitely that's been? I feel very safe with the band, because they just like, yeah, he's gonna do some whack shit, whatever. Sure,
he'll get there.
Yeah, and I mean they had to sit through like the draft versions before you should hear some of the other outtakes from Lucky Horror Picture Show, just fucking whack. And it's a few takes before I get there. I mean, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do a song called Willem Dafoe. Everyone's like, okay, sure. Which is one of my favorite, lyrical songs. But yeah, I remember actually when we had to sit, because we've been in our bubble. When you're in a bubble of a band and you've written all these songs, you're like, this is sick. We've made excellent work. And then we had to sit in Abbey Road and play all the songs the demos to our engineer, Thomas. And he's coming there from a critical thought. Like, he's thinking, how are we going to do this? But it was our first time, like, playing it to someone outside of the band who, like, worked at Abbey Road and stuff. And we're all just like, wait, is this good? Have we just been up our own asses for the last 6 weeks in our own bubble?
Are you reading his face? Like, what are you sitting there watching?
Definitely.
Going, what does he think?
He, which we only found out, he was like, yeah, this stuff is cool, guys. We're like, okay. But he, like, as part of their job at Abbey Road, they're, as an engineer, he told us later, they're not really allowed to, or not supposed to give value judgments on whether it's good or bad. They're just meant to be like, I can record this, like X, Y, Z.
Sure, yes.
I don't know if that's just a part of their practice over 50 years of doing it or whatever, where they're just like, don't upset the artist by not liking it or feed too much into them by doing this, that, the other. They're meant to remain neutral.
Because they're not a producer.
Because they're not a producer.
They're an engineer.
Exactly. They're not meant to kind of do that kind of thing. But we were like, what do you think? And they were like, you're the first person. We've been in a French cave for 6 weeks. What do you think? So that was definitely a bit nerve-inducing. And then the first time you play something, to someone and you're watching them kind of like this.
Yeah.
Was a big.
Yeah, it's like when you've drawn someone a picture and you go, what do you think? I'm watching you watch it. I'm watching you see it for the first time.
Or when I'd sent it to my Auntie Pat and Uncle Wayne for the first time, and I was waiting. And I mean, those guys go on and off country, so they're at a reception at the best of
waiting
time.
for the three dots
waiting
to come
for the
out,
dots, and then they loved it, and talked to them on the phone. I had great things, but I was definitely like waiting for a little while. Like, what do you guys think? Because that was the most important thing that they felt that I'd put into practice and woven into the overall story, the things that we talked about, which I knew that I had, but I wanted to make sure that they had kind of known that. So that was nerve-inducing. But performance-wise, I don't really get too self-conscious. I think maybe the history in being the MC of spoken word was a big thing, because often to make other poets who are maybe performing for the first time feel comfortable, I would make myself the sacrificial poet and just making an absolute goose out of myself and like flop or like do a terrible poem that everyone's like, boo, you know, to just make someone who's sitting there with a thing being like, oh, can I read this poem? Be like, oh, I can feel comfortable doing it.
Yeah. Tell me about the sacrificial poet, because that's a thing.
I think it's a thing. I think people do it in you know, different ways. Often in a slam, it's like, you know, when you're teaching people how the voting system works, you will get, some people will just get someone up from the crowd and make them the sacrificial poet. But I would really, I mean, in the Gold Coast, there would always be newcomers coming up. So I would always try to just throw myself in the edge. And I often challenged myself, you know, was hosting like once a month to come up with a new poem or to try to improvise something that was really bad. You know, when I first started, I was like trying to be like good, trying to be like, I'm good at being an MC. And after a while, because it's such a community based thing, it's about trying to make other people feel comfortable and able to express themselves. And sometimes to do that, you got to make a goose out of yourself. And I feel that the same way on stage dancing. If I'm dancing like a total freak, then someone who's maybe in the crowd feeling like a bit nervous to shake is like, ooh, okay, he's going at 150%, so I can at least go to 40%.
You're a facilitator of the environment.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's kind of definitely how I look at it. But yeah, I think I definitely, I don't know. I think in the process of writing, very self-critical. Like, you know, each of the songs in Abbey Road, some of the lyrics probably had, I maybe would get stuck on one verse and write like, I remember sitting out the back of Willem Dafoe and I just couldn't figure out how to finish the second verse. And I reckon I wrote like 35 different variations. And I'll get very self-critical in the process of writing it and trying to make it as good as I can, especially when we were going into Abbey Road. I'm like, we're going into Abbey Road. This has got to be the best thing I've ever done. I'm thinking about what I'm writing. I'm thinking about how the conversations I'm fitting sit in the musical landscape and the literary landscape as I'm writing it, you know, maybe creating references that maybe only myself understand in an echo chamber, but also, you know, touch on a few things. But then once it's made, you know, I was very proud of what we've created. Like I just wanted to get to a point where I was making art that I liked and that I would want to consume. And then I could release this album standing proudly on knowing that I'd gone to a legacy studio. I'd gone and spent time in my country and integrated, which my goal was to go to Abbey Road, tell a First Nations story, and to, you know, immortalize or record at least, or archive at least, elements of my Jabirr Jabirr culture into this album in what is the world's most famous studio, and tell a story that integrated my culture, my community, my identity with my contemporary music influences. And I put a lot of effort into trying to pull that off, and I felt confident that I had. And so I can't control what the album's going to do or how the album goes, but I can sleep at night knowing that I made a work of art that I'm really proud of. And that, I think, is something that I've arrived at over time, which is really trying to come at it from a sovereign lens of, I'm not trying to win something with my art, but this art is coming from a place of being at home in who I am.
There's no end goal.
Exactly. But, you know, it's very easy. You have to have a goal because you have to try to keep the thing alive. And it can be very easy to oscillate from a position of security in yourself and your soul and your identity and wanting to get to point A in the distance. And then that's where you can start to become a bit unwell. And that is investigated in songs like Leading Man Lost and Loki Horror Picture Show. Loki Horror Picture Show, chorus is basically, the original name for that song was All Right ? It's like, I think I might not be all right. I think I might just be all right. And the character's having these like visions of grandeur. And they're ridiculous, but then I'd litter them with some things that were really happening, like being at Abbey Road and all this kind of stuff. And it's about that fine line between the joy that comes from dreaming big and being whack. And that was almost influenced by Brat, to be honest. There was some elements of just like, yeah, I'm doing this. And that hyper confidence that's almost camped up that you love, that maybe you see in like Scissor Sisters or something like that. And people just being as extra as humanly possible, you know, and there's a big element of that, of the playfulness of dreaming, while then also if you get too attached to what you're dreaming up, then it can be like, oh, am I achieving this? Am I not achieving this?
You've broken your own heaven.
Exactly. So there's a lot of interrogation of balancing that fine line. But as far as how I feel about the work that we've put out critically, I'm very proud of it. And I'm just having fun because the industry is in a really whack time at the moment. And, you know, who knows where you're going to land on the roller coaster, and especially when you're at best breaking even, you have to at least be having fun.
Yeah.
You know, if you're just breaking even or just doing it at a loss, you know, it's like the music, for the select few, people are getting paid very well for it, but it used to be a roller coaster that you got paid to be on. Now you kind of pay to be on the roller coaster to a degree, but I think that there's a lot that's rewarding about just getting to create and tell these stories, and that feels like a victory to me. And again, that at the end of the album is the interrogation of these true heavens, and then a return to a real heaven of identity, culture, community, and the spirit of creativity that we've come from for 60,000 plus years, that has never had anything to do with winning an award or touring the world or doing any of that. It's the wealth and the currency that is story, which is, I think, fundamentally what's most important.